I built my business from nothing. No handouts, no shortcuts, just grit, long hours, and knowing when to strike. Trust is the foundation of every deal I've ever made. A handshake meant something where I came from. Break that and you're done. Turns out marriage isn't much different. My name is Richard Clayton. I'm 62 years old. Silver at the temples, a little heavier than I used to be, but I still wear a suit like I own the room because I do. I built Clayton Enterprises from a cramped apartment with a folding table for a desk. Now I've got an empire. My offices overlook downtown Houston, my name's on half the deals in the city, and when I walk into a meeting, people listen. At home, though, things have been off. Madeline, but she liked to be called Maddie, said it made her sound younger, had always been high energy. Thrived on attention. When I met her, she was all charm, the kind of woman who could walk into a party and have every man looking. I never minded. It suited me. A man like me doesn't need a quiet wife, he needs one who can handle a room, turn heads, play the part. Lately, though, the act was slipping. She was staying out later, using words like girls' night and networking events a little too often. My gut told me something was off. I never ignored my gut. It was Franklin, the neighborhood dog McDonald, who confirmed it. Mr. Clayton, he said, shifting the leashes in his hand. 5 dogs circled his feet, panting in the humid evening air. Saw your wife the other night down by the corner of Baywood and Fifth. Thought you were out of town. I was. Baywood and Fifth, the kind of place you go when you don't want to be seen. Not her usual crowd. Not her usual habits. I glanced at Franklin, a guy who liked to chat but never had an angle. You sure? Oh yeah. She was getting into some hotshots car. Convertible. You know, one of those loud ones with the big rims. Didn't catch the guy's name, but he looked like the type who spends more time in bars than boardrooms. Franklin shrugged, tugging his dogs forward. Just thought you should know. I nodded, pulled a 50 from my wallet, and handed it to him. For the dogs. He grinned. Much appreciated, sir. I stood there a moment, watching the dogs trot down the sidewalk, their leashes tangled. A car pulled up at the stoplight, bass thumping. Convertible. Flashy. Maddie had everything she could ever need. Stability, wealth, a name that meant something in this town. And yet here she was, climbing into some two-bit punk's car like a teenager sneaking out of the house. I had decisions to make. But I wasn't about to lose control. I didn't get to where I am by making rash decisions. A man in my position doesn't yell, doesn't throw a fit. He watches, he listens, and when the time comes, he moves with precision. That's how you win. The next morning, I was in my office before the sun was up. Houston traffic was already thick outside my window, brake lights stretching down the highway. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my first coffee of the day, and dialed Isaac. He picked up on the third ring, voice groggy. Mr. Clayton? It's early. You're young. You'll survive. I took another sip. Got a job for you. I heard rustling, the sound of him fumbling for his glasses. Yeah, of course. What do you need? Madeline's been spending time with someone. Name's Ryan McDonald. Event promoter, flashier than he should be. I want every piece of digital dirt you can find. Where he goes, who he talks to, money trails, social media slip-ups. If he once left a tab open on a public Wi-Fi, I want to know about it. Isaac let out a low whistle. Damn. Yeah, I can do that. Give me a day. You've got half of one. I hung up. By noon, I had a file sitting on my desk, thick enough to make a man rethink his life choices. Ryan McDonald was exactly what I expected, an ex-frat boy who never grew up, living off club connections, pushing high-end parties that blurred the line between exclusive and illegal. Plenty of cash moved through his accounts, but none of it clean. And Maddie? She wasn't just sneaking around. She was in business with him. Her name showed up on money transfers, nothing huge, just enough to fund some of his events, enough to make her complicit. And enough to give me the leverage I needed. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, watching her twirl pasta around her fork, pretending everything was normal. She had that bright, careless energy, laughing at something on her phone, tapping away with perfectly manicured nails. She looked up at me with a smile, like she hadn't just spent the afternoon transferring money to some two-bit hustler. How was your day? She asked, like nothing was wrong. I took a sip of wine. Productive? She nodded, glancing at her phone again. Mine, too. Had a lunch meeting with Lisa, then went shopping for the fundraiser this weekend. She lifted her wine glass. Think I finally found the perfect dress. I watched her for a beat, let the silence settle just enough to make her notice. Baywood and Fifth. That where you went shopping? Her hand stilled on the glass, just for a second. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. She recovered quickly, laughing like I'd made a joke. What? No, she shook her head, took a sip of wine. That's not exactly my scene, babe. I leaned back, let her sit in it. Let her feel the weight of my attention. Then whose scene is it? She looked at me, expression shifting, trying to read where I was going with this. Rick, what's this about? I didn't answer. Just reached for my phone, tapped a few times, and slid it across the table. She glanced down at the screen. Bank transfers. Timestamps. Screenshots of texts she thought had disappeared. I watched as the color drained from her face as her fingers tightened around her glass. She looked back up at me, lips parting like she had something to say, but for the first time she didn't have a lie ready. I picked up my glass, took my time with the sip. Like I said, productive day. Maddie didn't say a word at first. Just stared at the screen, her fingers twitching like she wanted to grab the phone and make it all disappear. Too late for that. She was caught and she knew it. She cleared her throat, sat up straighter. Rick, I can explain. I let out a slow breath like I was considering it. I wasn't. Go ahead. She hesitated, probably running through a list of excuses in her head, looking for the one that would make me drop this. Finally, she sighed, setting her glass down carefully. It's not what it looks like. I gave her a flat look. That's the best you've got? She shifted in her chair. It was an investment. That's all. Ryan has connections and Stop. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You're insulting my intelligence. That's not a good strategy. Her jaw tightened. Then what do you want me to say? The truth. She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. And what would that do? You already made up your mind. I let the silence stretch. I wasn't here for games. You're right about one thing. I don't waste time. I've got the facts and I've got a plan. I watched her closely, waiting for the first real crack to show. But I want to see if you're smart enough to tell the truth before I move forward. She held my gaze, but her breathing was faster now. She knew me well enough to know I never bluffed. Finally, she dropped the act, exhaling sharply. Fine. Yes. I've been seeing him. She leaned back, crossed her arms. Happy? I smiled, slow and deliberate. Not yet. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I picked up my phone and scrolled to another folder Isaac had sent over. Video clips. Security footage from a club Ryan ran, showing Maddie tucked into a VIP booth with him, laughing, whispering in his ear. Another clip of them leaving together, her arm looped through his. And then the money transfers, every single one. I turned the screen toward her. You weren't just seeing him. You were financing him. Which means, legally, you were in business with him. And considering his little operation doesn't exactly run above board, that makes things complicated for you. Her face went pale. You wouldn't what? I tilted my head. Turn this over to the right people? Let them take a closer look at where the money's going. I let that sink in before I leaned in just a little. I don't have to. All I have to do is make sure the right people see this and it takes care of itself. She swallowed, gripping the edge of the table. Rick, I made a mistake. But you don't have to do this. I took another sip of wine, weighing my options. I could have had her out of the house that night. Could have filed for divorce, frozen accounts, ruined her in 100 different ways. But that would be quick. Too easy. And I'd never been a man who settled for easy. Instead, I smiled, slow and even. You're right. I don't have to. I picked up my phone, locked it and slid it back into my pocket. But I will. She flinched, just barely, and for the first time since this started, I saw it, real fear. Not the surface-level kind, not the kind you fake when you're trying to smooth things over. The kind that hits when you realize you've made a mistake you can't fix. Good. I sat back, checking my watch. We're having dinner Friday. At Vincent's. Just a small gathering. Jake's coming. A few of my business partners. You'll be there. She frowned, confused. Why? I signaled the waiter, gesturing for the check. Because I want you to see exactly how this plays out. And I want you to sit there, smile, and act like nothing's wrong. Because when I decide it's time, I want to see the look on your face when you realize you're done. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands tightening into fists. I could see the fight in her, the way she wanted to claw her way out of this, turn it back around. But there was no way out. The waiter set the check down, and I slid my card across the table without a word. Maddie didn't touch her wine. She just sat there, staring at the tablecloth, trying to figure out how to survive what was coming next. I already knew the answer. She wouldn't. Vincent's was the kind of place where deals got made. Dim lighting, white tablecloths, waiters who knew when to talk and when to disappear. It was a place for men who ran things, who understood the weight of money and power. I closed some of my biggest deals at that corner booth by the window. Tonight, I wasn't here for business. Not the kind they put in the papers, anyway. Jake was already there when I arrived, nursing a bourbon. sleeves rolled up like he'd come straight from the office. He stood when I walked over, a firm handshake, a nod. Dad. Jake. I sat, waved for a drink. He studied me for a second, eyes sharp. He had my instincts, even if we didn't always see eye to eye. You seem relaxed. I am. That answer didn't satisfy him, but he let it go. He was smart enough to know I never made a move without a reason. Maddie showed up 10 minutes later, looking exactly how I expected. Dressed to impress, hair perfect, expression locked in place. From a distance, you'd think she was just another woman arriving fashionably late, not someone walking into her own execution. She kissed my cheek, all for show, sliding into the seat beside me. Hope I didn't keep everyone waiting. Jake didn't look up from his glass. Didn't notice. A small tick in her jaw, but she smiled through it, turning her charm toward the others as my business partners arrived. She knew how to play the part, I'd give her that. For now, I let her. Dinner started smooth. Talk of markets, real estate, new ventures. Maddie smiled, chimed in when it made sense, pretending she belonged here. I watched her closely, letting her settle, letting her believe, just for a second, that maybe tonight was just another night. Then I signaled the waiter. He nodded, stepped away, and returned a moment later with a tray, setting a small tablet down in front of me. I tapped the screen and the video played. No sound, but it didn't need it. The images spoke for themselves. Maddie, laughing with Ryan. Maddie, handing him an envelope. Maddie, climbing into his car. Frame after frame, time-stamped, undeniable. Silence fell over the table. Maddie's smile froze, her hand tightening around her fork. One of my partners, Julian, exhaled through his nose, setting his napkin down. Jesus, Rick. I looked at Maddie. Tell them what they're looking at. She swallowed, her nails digging into her palm. This isn't. It's not what you think. I took a slow sip of my bourbon, watching her scramble. Then tell us what it is. She opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing to say. Jake leaned back, shaking his head. Christ, Maddie. Her eyes darted between us, looking for an escape, a lifeline. This is private. No, I said, voice even. You made it public the second you decided to embarrass me. She blinked, stunned. Not used to me speaking to her like that in front of an audience. I gestured to the screen. See, I don't care that you cheated. That's almost expected at this point. What I care about is that you made me look like a fool. That you spent my money on that. I tilted my head. And worse, you thought I wouldn't notice. Julian cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at her. Another partner drained his glass. No one was going to defend her. She looked at me again, lower now, angling for sympathy. Rick, please, we can talk about this. I smiled, slow, deliberate. Oh, we will. I pulled an envelope from my inside pocket, slid it across the table. Divorce papers. I signed them this morning. You get nothing. And before you argue, my lawyers already found the clause in the prenup that covers infidelity. You walked right into it. Her breath hitched. I sat back, gesturing to the waiter again. Another round. Maddie sat frozen as drinks were refilled around her. The conversation moving on like she wasn't even there. Like she didn't matter. She reached for my arm, voice low, desperate. Rick, please, we can fix this. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. Then at her. I don't fix broken things, Maddie. I replace them. She flinched. For the first time all night, she looked like she understood just how badly she had lost. I let the silence settle for a beat longer, then picked up my drink, toasting to the room. To loyalty. The men nodded, raising their glasses. Maddie sat there, shattered, while the world moved on without her. Maddie was gone by the end of the week. The house felt bigger without her, quieter, but not in a way that bothered me. The absence of something useless is never a loss. My lawyer handled the paperwork. My security made sure she took only what was hers. Clothes, jewelry, nothing more. She lingered in the foyer that last morning, suitcase in hand, like she thought there was something left to say. I didn't give her the satisfaction. When the door shut behind her, I turned back to the window looking out over my land, my home, my empire. The weight of it all sat comfortably on my shoulders. I built this life. She was a guest in it. And now she was gone. By noon I was back in the office, shaking hands, closing deals. The world moved forward, just like I did. I had a company to run, people who relied on me, and I wasn't about to waste another second on someone who didn't deserve a place at my table. Jake showed up later that afternoon, unannounced, stepping into my office with the same directness I used to have at his age. He shut the door behind him, eyes sharp, arms crossed. "Well," he said, leaning against the desk. "That was something." I glanced up from the contract I was reviewing. "You here to say I went too far?" He snorted, shaking his head. "No. She deserved it." He studied me for a second, then exhaled. "I guess I just didn't expect you to handle it like that." I set my pen down. "Like what?" "Like a boardroom execution." I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "You think emotion gets you further than logic?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Just never seen you handle something personal like it was business." I picked up my pen again. It was business. The second she started funneling money to that idiot, it stopped being personal. Jake nodded slowly, as if he was still processing it. "She tried calling me." I raised a brow. "Didn't pick up," he said quickly. "Wasn't about to get in the middle of that. Just figured you'd want to know." I didn't react. Maddie had spent years playing the role of the perfect wife, learning how to twist situations in her favor. She must have thought she could do the same here, call Jake, get sympathy, find a way to claw back into something. She was learning the hard way that once I was done with someone, I was done. "If she calls again, block her," I said simply. Jake studied me for a beat longer, then nodded. "Fair enough." He pushed off the desk, hands in his pockets. "So, what now?" I glanced at the paperwork in front of me, the next deal, the next move. I was already ahead. Same as always. Business as usual. Jake let out a low chuckle. "You really don't stop, do you?" I looked up at him, eyes steady. "No. And neither should you." He nodded once, thoughtful, then turned for the door. "All right. I'll see you at the next board meeting." "Jake." He paused, hand on the handle. "You handled yourself well at dinner." He didn't smile, but there was something like approval in his eyes. "Learn from the best." The door shut behind him. I looked back at the paperwork, inked my signature, and moved on. Maddie was a mistake, but mistakes don't define men like me. They sharpen us. 2 weeks later, Maddie was just a name on old paperwork, a past investment that didn't pan out. She tried calling once, then twice, but after Jake ignored her, she got the message. I wasn't a man you could circle back to. Not in business, not in life. Ryan McDonald didn't fare much better. His name came up in an audit when one of my contacts decided to take a closer look at his financials. Just a routine check, of course. A few flagged transactions, some discrepancies, and suddenly every venue he worked with wanted to distance themselves. Nobody wanted a promoter tied to even a whisper of fraud. Clubs stopped taking his calls, clients backed out, and in less than a month, the man who thrived on being in the center of every party was on the outside looking in. I didn't have to ruin him. He did that himself. I just made sure people were paying attention. Isaac called one afternoon, voice casual but pleased. "McDonald's toast. His last big client dropped him today." I barely glanced up from my desk. "That so?" "Yep. Word got around fast. He's radioactive." A pause, then a slight chuckle. "Didn't even have to dig that hard. Guy was sloppy." "Most people are," I said. "That's why they lose." Isaac hesitated. "What about Maddie?" I closed the file in front of me, leaning back. "Not my problem. Cold. Practical. I had nothing left to take from her. She was out of my house, my money, my life. I had no use for her, and I wasn't about to waste energy chasing something I'd already won." "Fair enough," Isaac said. "By the way, your brother called." I looked up at that. "Danny?" "Yeah. Left a message. Said he wanted to talk." I didn't answer right away. Danny and I hadn't spoken in years. He walked away over a deal gone south, too proud to see the bigger picture. I let him go. You don't chase people who don't want to stay. But now he was calling. I picked up my phone, stared at the missed call. I could ignore it. Leave the past where it was. Or I could answer, see if he'd finally come around. I let the phone sit for a minute longer, then dialed. Danny picked up on the second ring. "Rick." "Danny." A pause, long enough to say more than words. "Guessing you heard." "Yeah," he said. "Heard a lot." Another pause. "You handled it well." I smirked slightly. "Course I did." He chuckled, quiet. "I know we don't see eye to eye, but maybe it's time to fix that." I didn't say anything right away. It would be easy to shut the door, to tell him the window closed a long time ago. but something about the way he said it told me he meant it. And I wasn't the same man I was back then. I exhaled. Maybe. Another silence, but this one wasn't heavy. It was open-ended. I'll be in town next week, Danny said. Drinks? I nodded to myself. Yeah, we can do that. The line clicked off. I set the phone down, staring out the window at the city below. I had spent my whole life building. First a business, then a reputation, then an empire. But legacies weren't just about money. They were about what you left behind, who you carried with you. Maddie and Ryan were just footnotes now. But this was something worth considering. A month later, I was exactly where I was meant to be, at the top. Maddie was long gone, just another name that wouldn't be remembered. Last I heard, she was working PR for some mid-tier firm, trading expensive dresses for business casual and fighting to stay relevant in circles that had already replaced her. Nobody cared about a woman who used to be somebody's wife. Ryan had vanished too, chewed up and spit out by the same industry he thought he ran. No venue would touch him, no investor would risk their money. He went from bottle service and private jets to bouncing between cheap Airbnbs, selling VIP lists to club kids who didn't know better. I didn't have to lift another finger. The world took care of people like them. Jake was stepping up in the company. After years of resisting, of trying to carve his own path, he finally understood what I built, what it took to keep an empire standing. He wasn't just some kid trying to prove himself anymore, he was becoming a man I could trust to carry the name forward. At our last meeting, he didn't hesitate when I threw a major deal in front of him. Didn't blink when I made him call the shots. He handled it clean, efficient. That was all I needed to see. Danny and I met for drinks. No big speeches, no dramatic apologies. Just two men who understood time had been wasted and neither of us was getting younger. He had his own business, had done well for himself, and after a couple of hours and a few whiskeys, we both knew this wasn't about fixing the past. It was about making sure the future wasn't a repeat of it. We shook hands before leaving. It wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something better. I stood in my office one evening looking out over the city I owned. Everything I had built was still here, stronger than ever. The people who mattered were in their places. The ones who didn't were ghosts. My phone buzzed on my desk. Another deal coming through, another step forward. I let it ring for a second before picking up. Talk to me. It never stops. And that's exactly how I like it.